different effect on what it is that you're trying to do. So we found that more acidic clays just dump. They crash super fast and well. So if you have some strain that's struggling a little bit and you're going for that,
interesting,
big time with the crashing situation. Or I had friends 3-4 years ago who asked me to run their rosin chips, their pressed rosin chips. And I was like, what do you want made out of these?
I wasn't going to bring that up yet, but yeah, I mean.
And so,
wait, for anybody listening, are you telling me that you would take
We're Jug Dealers, we're the podcast you need in your feed, teaching the game like you never seen. Jerin, Gabe, GRAMBO, from OGs, masters of the globe, set your mind free. From Denver, Colorado, where the data's green, we set the data points for the SOPs. Jug Dealers Podcast, yes indeed.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jug Dealers Podcast, where we discuss all things cannabis and lifestyle related, brought to you by the good people at 5E and now available at jugdealers.net and jugdealers.shop. We are back in studio today with the Diamond Mind. Hopefully you enjoyed part 1 where we discussed the living soil aspect of what he does, but now we are going to discuss my favorite part, the extraction, in which I've been smoking the homies extracts for years now. And he's still one of the true extract artists. For any of you who know me, you know that I had the Clementine challenge years ago where I took 2,000 grams and gave it to 6 different extractors because I wanted to prove that extract was an art, in which I had 6 different people who came back to me with 6 kind of different extracts. So we're going to talk to the Diamond Mind today about his journey, how he got into making BHO, and then we're going to talk about some of the science and art of extraction, breaking down some of the myths and trends, because I think there's a lot of myths and misinformation out there. And then realistically, where you see the future of BHO, because so many people in this market have disappeared because, rosin has kind of taken a hold. But, as you and I will agree, you're missing out on so much cool hash if all you smoke is rosin. So let's start off with, why don't you tell me a little bit about how your journey, if you tune into our last episode, we talked all about how you got into living soil and how, really you kind of stepped in awesome by just learning with a really awesome dude who just gave you the highest echelon method of doing it. How'd you get into BHO though? Like, how'd that translate over to BHO?
So, when I got into the mix of everything, it was when the red cards first hit the scene, like the medical red cards.
Yep.
It just
caregiver days.
Yep, caregiver days. It was probably 2 to 4 years after that is when extracts really started hitting the scene.
Yep.
So we're
talking 2011, 2012.
Yeah, exactly. And so this was kind of the journey. So once it was the new thing to hit weed. And we had like a lot of trim left over from just making all of our flower packs and everything like that. And so the first thing that we did was we got wind of taking your trim, putting it in a bubble bag, and then putting it dry ice in there.
Okay.
And then just shaking it over glass.
Okay.
So that was like the first kind of hash that I started making. And then things evolved. And then the butane extraction came out. And just keeping up with the trends and where things were going, that's when we decided like, hey, we could use all this trim and we could make it into really good hash with this whole.
What was your first machine?
The ETS.
Classic.
Yeah.
Classic.
So that's actually where the journey started. So that was one of the first ones that hit kind of the scene as like a more of like a legal, like put together one. So I went down there. They gave me like a little demo. And then we decided to go with that one. And so we bought that and
Care Saver pump, the whole deal.
Never got a clean run out of the thing.
Okay.
So they had me troubleshoot and do everything that they asked for to get a clean run. And the Care Saver was what the issue was.
Okay.
So it leaked.
Spitting oil back in.
Every single time.
That's been a problem with those.
And so luckily, we were just doing distillation runs, so it's not like we were ruining material. But every run that would come out, it was just there was oil in the end. So after being pretty frustrated with doing that for like 6-8 months. I was like, I'd like to get my money back. They're a little hesitant about that, but they gave it back to me. And that one of the people working there was Murphy Murray, and she suggested that I go over and see the guys at Incredibles because they had a system that they just built that was passive.
Yep.
So that hiccup in the beginning really was a blessing in disguise, because going over there and meeting the guys at Incredibles and then becoming friends with all of those dudes put me on like a pretty winning path to where I'm kind of at today.
And Incredibles was making their own, they just still do make their own extraction machine.
Yeah, exactly. And so I didn't even know what passive was at the time. I was pretty green to all this stuff. So I went over there, met Dickie in the shop, Telly, Max, Derek. Everyone was super nice, very welcoming. And I was over there for 2 hours, and they gave me a rundown, explained how everything worked. I was in once they told me that I didn't have to use a pump to move the solvent. They're like, it's just hot and cold. And I was
right.
I'm down. So I used the money that I got back from ETS, put a deposit down on one of their systems, and then a couple months later, they had one ready to go for me.
So as you started diving into kind of doing BHO extraction, when did you realize, hey, this is something I really want to friggin' master?
Pretty much when I started seeing photos of everyone's slabs.
You're like, I want to be better. You started with dry material, so you started making shatter. Because I mean, looking at the timeline, I think what Bill was saying, he created it on my birthday. So it's October 13th, 2014 is when he created it. So up before then, everybody was doing dry material, in which, I mean, dude, you could do slabs all day long back then. It's just a question of how many ovens you had. You know what I mean? When you were getting into it, who were some of the people you kind of looked up to as far as making hash at the time? Like who, obviously the Incredibles guys were some of your biggest mentors.
They were the only ones that I knew. Really. Like they're like, Insta wasn't really popping yet. Like no one was like showing pictures of shatter. It was pretty much, you went to events and saw, you know, a bunch of people with different hash, in which, I agree. I mean, and not for nothing, AK, who, you know, stays in the shadows, has always stayed in the shadows for years. He said he might come on the show at some point, in which I really want him to come and talk about deep water culture. Yeah, he should. Because he's done some really cool stuff with DWC. You know, it's funny because a lot of you guys who came up through the red card days, you really mastered getting the most out of not that many plants. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And you guys, you know, you're sitting here 10,000 a bench out of 6 plants, you know, like those are pretty impressive numbers, you know? So, you know, definitely. And look, the Incredibles guys, you know, they were definitely a big part of the scene and coming up through, you know, everybody's got to understand, you know, while Giddy really came up with that first process and first machine it's not like anything was patented. Mm-hmm. So once it came out, you had all these other guys who were like, well, we're going to make machines. We see how the chemistry works. So, you know, explain to some of our listeners how that does work, because I think quite frankly, a lot of people don't understand, like, what the hell is BHO? Like, why is this, you know, I always tell people hydrocarbons are best for extracting hydrocarbons because they just bond really well together. Yeah. But explain how that process kind of works in a condensed nutshell for our listeners. So to put it as basic as possible, we want to harvest the plant at its peak ripeness.
Kind of like fresh fruit when they freeze it, you know? Exactly,
yeah. And we would harvest it, get it in the freezer as quick as possible. And when we started, it was just regular freezers. Now, you know, we get scientific -80 freezers, flash freezes. Everything.
Do you find it's better or colder? Or?
I think it freezes the material much faster. If you put it in a normal freezer, not packed to the gills, probably takes 6, 8, maybe 10 hours for it to get rock solid frozen. Okay. In the -80 freezer, it's about 1.5 to 2 hours.
Okay, big difference. Yeah. Big difference.
Yeah, it's they're rock solid. So like we we just want to trap those terpenes in as fast as possible. So that we have them
and the biggest thing, you know, like we say with live resin, is you're really trying to capture everything.
Yeah, correct. So, got a little derailed going back to the process.
Yeah.
So
as far as like, you know, from there, are you running your columns at -80? You running them at -40? Is because
probably I'm just dry ice alcohol temps, probably around -50 is probably where we're at. I haven't done this personally because I don't have those crazy chillers that get to -80, but I have heard from some of my friends who run that cold that they see a diminishing return.
I've seen that, you know, when we did the Clementine challenge, that was 2017. And that was the first time anybody had really publicly released diamonds. But considering I gave everybody 2,000 grams, so everybody started with the exact same amount or within 50 grams or so.
Yeah.
The winners came back with 56 grams and they were running down at -80, whereas Incredibles, CRX, and Green Dot all came back with like 120 and they were blasting around like -40. So it's definitely, for those of you who don't know, it does make a big difference because at that point it's just pulling certain constituents because it's so cold.
Exactly. So I think the sweet spot for getting everything and all the terps and the yield is like -40, -50. I don't think it really needs to be any colder than that.
What factors do you think in the process really separate a good extract from a great extract? Because one of the things I definitely noticed is that, depending on who's doing it, it could be totally different.
Yeah. I also think too, so a lot of extractors out there, that's their main gig is being an extractor. So you're really only limited to how good you can make your extract by the material that you're getting. So if you're growing the material and it's the same material and it's grown the same and a lot of your normal variables are out of the equation, I think you can tweak your methods to make the best extract possible by those variables. And what I mean by that is like, say you have a strain and you're taking it at 56 nights and it's fire strain, you love it, but it's coming out darker. You might be able to play around by taking it a little earlier and lightening up that color without having to use CRC or remediation method, which will muddle a little bit of your terpene content. So all of those things are relative. If you're running trash material, use CRC, you can make it better or crash better or whatever. But the best of the best, in my personal opinion, is no CRC and just dialing in the strains that you're extracting.
Can you explain? Because CRC's definitely caught, kind of a bad name over the years.
For sure.
In which I've had people explain it to me where, you can do a light filtering or you can do a heavy filtering.
Yeah.
What exactly is CRC for our people who, are listening who don't understand it?
So CRC became the term. It stands for color remediation cartridge, which is, that's really like a piece of the equipment, not necessarily the whole process, but I won't go into that. It's pretty much filtering your extract over various medias, silica, clays, which pull different things from the extract itself, terpenes, chlorophylls, things like that. So you can get different colors, different textures, different tastes. You can make things crash diamonds out better. It really does have its place, but it just depends on what you're trying to do and what type of material you're running.
And for a while, it got overused because people were kind of remediating with it. They were running powdery mildew material and stuff like that. And I think that's where rosin kind of started to see that rise, was that so many people were using BHO just to remediate garbage that all of a sudden rosin kind of shines up. And not for nothing, all these people pulling their flower at 50 days, they're cranking out just totally white, white rosin. It definitely, look, I can understand where it has its appeal. It has a certain look to it that is, pleasing. But at the same time, and as we'll discuss here in a little bit, when it comes to what the actual content is, it is kind of just intrinsically lacking,
Yeah, you said it well. I think two things brought a lot of bad stigmatism to BHO. One of them was open blasting and lighter butane.
Yeah.
And the explosions for people that weren't being careful with stuff. And then CRC was a big downfall for butane hash as well, because you can do it right with proper material, but the majority of the people out there doing it was just remediating trash. So, but it's pretty easy to tell when that's happened with a hash.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
there's a almost like a Vicks vapor rub.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Depending on what media you use, it has a different type of aftertaste if you're using B80 or T5 and then there's the amounts of how much clays you're using, all of that. And I played around with all of that when it first hit the scene. And then you got like different medias from like Chemtech that have all kinds of different pHs, which have also a different effect on what it is that you're trying to do. So we found that more acidic clays just make diamonds just dump. They crash super fast and well. So if you have some strain that's struggling a little bit and you're going for that, you can add some W1 and it will assist you big time with the crashing situation. Or I had friends 3-4 years ago who asked me to run their rosin chips, their pressed rosin chips. And I was like, what do you want made out of these?
I wasn't going to bring that up yet, but I mean.
And so,
wait. For anybody listening, are you telling me that you would take the material that was left over from the little pads, you would take those and you would run it through your machine?
Yeah, they're dump hash. There's so much hash left in those chips.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
By the way, I knew this, but it's just one of those funny things where it's like, I always tell people, if you take your spent chips to the BHO guy and he can get more out of it, I think you missed something.
I mean, every good rosin extractor needs a good BHO extractor. you're really leaving like a lot of the goodies behind. And
so you're saying you're just leaving money on the table.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's like, you can soak them in with the MCT oil or soak them in ethanol, which is a solvent, and make,
right.
gummies or whatever it is that you want to. But you can do a lot with BHO that you couldn't do before. And CRC helps out a lot for sure with the trash material.
Right. How important do you think strain selection is as far as making BHO?
Huge. It's probably one of the biggest factors is the strains that you're using and knowing what they do. Like we were talking about earlier, some strains are definitely much better for HT and diamonds and sauce, and some come out much better in batter. And the only way you can really figure that out is by running it. I mean, you can get some guesses because it's like, there's sandy resin glands, there's wet ones, and the wet ones tend to be kind of better for diamonds and your HT fraction of things.
Okay. So if it's a greasier on the glove.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's some stuff you can do beforehand, but really the best is running it yourself, and it'll tell you like, hey, this one's heavy on the terps. It might be better in the diamond situation, or this one is like sweet spot for batter. So running those and doing your own experience and knowing the strains that you're using is pretty huge, and it makes your life a lot easier. It takes a lot of guessing work out when you're doing your extractions.
Yep. What do you think is one of the bigger mistakes that some of the younger kids getting in, making BHO? Obviously, there's not as many kids doing it that are making rosin.
Yeah.
But still, you have new markets opening up. I know we used to hire a lot of young scientists to blast in the labs, kids who had never run, but they got someone teaching them. What do you think is one of the bigger mistakes that a lot of young kids make?
Safety, I would say. Like a lot of if you're not safety conscious and you can't really think outside the box and you can't turn wrenches, you probably shouldn't make BHO. You stick to
so not just the chemistry aspect.
Yeah,
you got to understand keeping things tight. You're obviously running at high pressures.
Yep,
and butane is flammable.
It is. So if you're not that mechanically inclined and you don't really understand what is happening in the columns and the pathways and things like that, it's, stick to a trash can and a paddle. If,
what I mean. So BHO has faced some stigmas over the years, compared to solventless. How would you like to respond to that? How would you like to address that?
Not hating on rosin at all. You know, it has its place. A lot of people don't have access to the equipment or the gas or the knowledge. And so, you know, making rosin for you and your setup is, you know, that's going to work best. But, I think that a lot of stuff is left behind. It's,
Well, the people, what about the folks that say it's cleaner? Because that's the adjective that always really that's the one that always gets me real fired up.
yeah.
Because I'm like, cleaner, maybe pick a different word.
I think a lot of people are uneducated as far as that goes. Like, you know, if you don't know shit about weed or extractions and you go into a dispensary, they're going to push solventless on you and they're going to be like, it's cleaner.
It's water extracted.
Exactly.
So there's no solvents.
There's
used.
no solvents. The solvents are dangerous and deadly. And sure, if you're open blasting and you got weird mystery oils and your lighter butane and like, yeah, but that was 15, 20 years ago. Like we've come a long way from that. I think it's really important that, okay, going back to like, if you're an amateur, it's extremely important to distill your gas. It doesn't matter if you're getting 99% clean, pure butane. It's very, very important to distill the gas that you're using before you do your extraction, because if there are any impurities in there, they're gone and you're just using clean, pure gas.
And then also distilling your gas between the runs too?
That's not really necessary. If you, so I have a solvent tank. So all the solvent that goes into that solvent tank is distilled gas. So if that tank is full, you can run that tank all day long and all the gas that's coming back into it is also redistilled of your clean gas.
Okay.
So you don't have to do that in between each runs. It's just mostly keeping whatever gas enters the system just needs to be distilled from the get-go.
What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions of BHO? Because I know, you know, I always say to people, you know, people are like, oh, you're smoking hydrocarbons. Like you're smoking that's unhealthy because you're smoking hydrocarbons. And I kind of say, well, between BHO and rosin, like there's a lot more that's not filtered out in the rosin than there is in the BHO. So what do you think is like one of the bigger things where you see a lot of people kind of running their mouths about it, but you're like, you hear them and you're like, that's not real.
I think a lot of people regurgitate stuff that they hear from their friends and other people. And so they just keep hearing the same thing over and over again. And then everyone just says solvents are dangerous and dirty. And like we just stated, like if you do things properly, no, they're not. And they're very easy to purge out of the extract. Butane evaporates at 33 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you poured liquid butane into a jar and sat it on the counter, it would be evaporating in a couple minutes. So and when you if you do things correctly, you finish the extract off in a vac oven, heat and vacuum. And when you pull vac on chamber like that, it lowers the boiling point of compounds. So it's extra easy to get butane out of the extract if you do it correctly. If you don't purge it, sure, there's going to be leftover residual tain in your extract. So I think a lot of it too is like, you know, making sure and knowing that your extractor is doing a good job, because there's a lot of hacks. There's people who make good rosin. There's people who make bad rosin.
Just like everything else.
Same thing with BHO.
So, you know, you run some decent size runs. How do you balance running decent size runs with maintaining that quality? You've kind of reached an equilibrium where I think you...
Yeah, so I used the Incredible system for like 3 or 4 years. It was great. I got my feet off the ground. I got, you know, the basis of learning how passive systems work. But I saw room for improvements. I needed a little bit bigger columns. I needed more gas. There was a couple things that I saw. So I started building just a system kind of tailored to my size of a grow and my size runs. Like I try to do 1 strain per light and try and hit those numbers where I fill my columns like that. So when I take down and I've got all my material prepped, I can get my extraction week kind of, I know how many runs I'm going to do. I know what's fitting in what. And that's how I kind of base things off of that. So that's all individual depending on like whoever's running stuff, how much material they have, how big their system is. But for me and my smaller batch grows, that's where I have things pretty dialed to where it's like, I know what's coming out of every table.
And yours is, it's almost like a fine wine where it's curated from start to finish and it's going to be limited batch, limited amount, you know, and that's something I've always kind of respected about you is, you know, sometimes you got to wait a month, you know, sometimes it's like, we're out of that flavor right now, you know, which is, totally. That's the way you keep the prices, you know, sustained. That's the way you keep the quality so that it's this, you know, the same quality every time. And so that's something I've always respected about your product is I can come, you know, I can get it and I know it's always going to be top notch, you know, and I can show up to parties and smoke it with people and they look at me and they're like, this is BHO? And you're like, yeah, definitely. Like that's all I smoke, you know?
Yeah.
And I do smoke some rosin, but you know, I definitely would prefer. And, you know, one thing I've noticed too, just smoking BHO, and I always tell this to folks, especially if you're smoking like your red pop or something like that, something that's sweeter, lower the temperature that you're smoking that at because some of those terpenes volatilize at a lower temperature. Yep. So a lot of times, you know, I'll smoke something like that red pop at like, you know, 450, you know what I mean? Because I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make is they go in and they're just, hey, that burned my throat. Yep. Well, no, you smoked it too hot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that's something where a lot of people just kind of, you know, they miss it. You know, they're not really kind of understanding that like, hey, you know, on the terpene episode that we did, you know, a lot of the terpenes volatilize 350, 380, you know, stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, of course it's going to burn your throat, you know?
Yeah.
Where do you see, like, what do you think the next big thing is as far as evolutions in cannabis? You know, I personally feel like there's going to be a resurgence in BHO as people kind of seek out more of these obscure flavors. But what do you think is, I mean, you know, as we're kind of approaching quasi legalization, you know, what do you think is the next big thing?
From all the stuff that I've seen, all these, what becomes popular definitely comes in waves. So, I would agree that, you know, some BHO might come back, rosin might stay king, like, you know, whatever people really like. And like, it also kind of depends on the regions. Like you go to Europe and it's mostly rosin, like not too many people over there are doing BHO for a lot of the same reasons that, you know, we talked about where it's like, you know, they don't have access to the machinery. They can't get the gas. They don't have the knowledge. It's a little bit more complicated of a process. It's not as easy as just washing, filtering, and
well, building a BHO lab costs
it's money,
a lot more money.
Yeah. You know? Well, I mean, if you build it yourself, like there's so many companies now where you can piece together and design your own systems where you're not spending $60K on a system. You can spend millions of dollars on a system. It just depends on how big you're trying to go, what kind of equipment you're trying. What's cool about where we're at is like you can get as crazy as you want with it. You want an $80,000 negative 80 C chiller? Cool, you can get that. Or you want to run a passive system and just use dry ice and have it be as cheap as possible? You can do that too.
Do you think a lot of that comes down to the maker and not the equipment so much?
That's a good question. I think it really just kind of depends. Because like I made my own system and my system probably cost $8K. And I've been using it for 8 years now. You know what I mean? So I really think that the main things are strain and knowledge of what you're doing. So like if you're growing your material, you get to see a lot of factors that you don't get to see if you're just running the system. So I think those things are like the important things for future stuff. You know what I mean? So,
you said you got a lot of different genetics you still gotta kind of chip through. It made me think of, there's a strain that genetic that Green Dot had years ago called Gunslinger. And it was, it tasted like watermelons. You know, I always tell people it's one of those ones you could put under grandma's nose and she would think it's like a candy if she was blindfolded. Is there a terp you're chasing? Is there anything in specific that you're really looking for? I gotta admit, the pink Skittles that you gave me, it tastes like it tastes like you're smoking a grapefruit.
Yeah.
Like it really, and I kind of, with the Clementine challenge, I kind of soured myself on a lot of the citruses, but I still love grapefruit. I think it's just such an appealing flavor. But is there anything you're trying to chase down that you're really looking for?
I wouldn't say there's anything specific that I'm chasing down, but I am just chasing the terp. Like a lot of these people will get infatuated with yield because they don't, they want to make more money, whatever.
Right.
It's kind of gone backwards for where I'm at, where I'm just chasing the unique terp because my style of grow, whatever it is, usually yields pretty well. It's pretty rare that I don't get a good yield. And I'm just talking about on the flower side of things.
Yep.
It's all going to vary with the hash, but
is there a number you're at where like you're like, oh, that thing blasted at like 2%, I can't keep it. It tasted amazing, but 2%, I just can't do it.
If it's below 4, I really don't like to keep it in the mix. Most of the stuff we have are between 5 and 6%.
Yeah.
So of course we want the highest percent possible, but right now where things are at and keeping things like as real and new for everybody, because everybody, like I love the fruit strains. AK loves gas. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like
it's funny for me because I don't like the fruit strains when it comes to in flower, but in hash, I freaking love them, dude.
It translates really differently.
And it's just always it's just so, and again, like you could smoke it at the airport and no one has any freaking idea.
Yeah.
But that was something that I learned working with Rye Pritchard because, he came to me with some green crack. And that first Terp Quest dinner, they paired green crack with watermelon. And I remember walking up to the booth and being like, yeah, no, I'm good. I don't really like green crack. Like, I hate the flower.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, dude, this is different. Smoke the hash and then and I smoked the hash and I was like, whoa, this is way different. Like, I like this so much more than the flower. And I think there's a lot of things where I don't necessarily love the flower flavor, but when it comes to the extract, I'm like, dude, this is the best.
That's why you just got to try them. You know what I mean? Because, you hit the nail on the head. The flower is not going to translate to the hash. And that same thing goes into, because like the big thing that, there's so many carts out there. And carts aren't my favorite, but they're a necessity.
But you make an awesome cart, though. But you're also using the actual terps from the plant as opposed to these botanical terps.
Yeah, a lot of that's the thing too. Like it's passion versus profit. You know what I mean? Like if people don't care, they want the cheapest they can get and however cheapest they can make it and they get it out there. We're more on the side of like, we want the best. Everything that I make, I smoke myself. Yeah. And so like, if it doesn't like pass my standard of things, it don't go out. Either gets made into something else or, you know what I mean? Like, but it doesn't get my label. It doesn't go out the door.
Nice.
So yeah.
What's the wildest thing you've had happen in the lab?
Got showered with extract.
With BHO.
Yeah, that was probably the worst.
Blow seal?
No. With the Incredibles extractor, you'd crack that top ball valve. You'd have the purge line on there, but crack the top ball valve so that you could get the pressure out so you could do your pours. End of the day, it was still pretty new to the system. And I had my hand over it. Did not have the purge line hooked up. Opened the ball up and it shot all the ceiling, man. The wall. It was the middle of the winter time. I threw my shirt away and my head was just covered in it. And I came home and my girl was like, what the hell is going on? Because it was dumping snow and I'm shirtless. And I'm like, I'm not even.
Did you have to take a shower in alcohol? Like,
dude, yeah. I wiped down with alcohol and luckily I didn't have to cut all my hair off. But it was like, I got pretty just shot in the face.
Bro, that's so
It was heavy. But, a lot of people have worse stories where they've blown up and lit on fire.
Oh, yeah. No, I've you know what I mean? Yeah, I had one buddy that I was working with and they were open blasting outside in the winter in a tent and he was going back and forth inside to the ovens and, it was winter. So as you were saying, boiling point's 33 degrees. Yep. So the butane was settling on the ground. Yeah. And as he's walking in and out, he's dragging the butane in. It's just settling. And all of a sudden on the video, you watch the whole room flash and all the electrical lines and everything. So, and look, that's why a lot of people don't do butane because they can't handle that. You know, it's flammable. You have to understand chemistry. You got to understand different temperatures. You're running way colder than you would rosin. There's a bunch of different things that you need to be cognizant of, and you can't be in there with a paddle high as fuck. Like, you know,
there's definitely a safety aspect to it. Like you need to understand the chemistry. It's not complicated, but you need to understand what's going on. Butane's heavier than air, so it sinks. So yeah, it'll pool on the floor. You don't want extension cords there. You know, where things will spark. Like there's definitely an element of being extra safe to it too. But you know, done correctly, knock on wood, but I mean, I haven't had any issues. I've been doing this for 10 years, but I'm aware of all the stuff that's happened. And that accident where I got blasted with Tane was 100% my fault. User error. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it just, you know, like I said, going back to like, it's important on if you're in a legal lab facility and those are your employees, that they know what's going on. Joe Schmoes are usually who blow themselves up. I don't know if you saw that video in, I think it was New Mexico. There was a lab. These were making slabs and they had a pour out and it was Tane heavy. And he was boiling off all the Tane with a heat gun.
Ooh,
dude, it hit the coil. The whole room went up.
Ooh.
You know what I mean? So it's like, don't be an idiot. Like there's just certain people. It's like you shouldn't. If that's the type of person you are, don't make BHO.
And it's funny because in Maryland, you know, when I worked at Grassroots, everybody we hired in the lab there, they were all 22-year-old kids with chemistry degrees.
Yeah.
You know, just because we wanted to make sure that we had people that understood
totally
how gases move, how things flow around, in which, you know, again, with rosin, you don't really need to understand these things.
Mm-hmm.
Any parting words for anybody who has thoughts about BHO and like I said, the one thing I love about what you do is living soil, single source BHO. I mean, it's, you know, for all the rosin heads, it's like almost like an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Because they're like living soil BHO, like, you know, why would you? And then you're kind of like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. And I mean, I guess like, so when rosin really hit the scene, I got a press and, you know, I'm down for everything weed. I'm not against rosin by any means, but going to BHO first and then backwards to rosin, it just, for me, it just wasn't there. It didn't make it any better. The high lacked for me personally, because I think you're leaving so much in the bags. I mean, the THCA.
I think it's a different high because I think there's just more constituents in there.
Yeah.
Whereas with the BHO, it really is just cannabinoids and terps, and there's nothing else in there. I
mean, the warmer you do your extract, the more impurities you're going to pull, BHO included. So before we started getting chillers and dry ice coils and all of that stuff, you know, it was bucket of ice, but you're only at like 32 degrees if you're lucky. Mm-hmm. You're doing it outside in the wintertime. You know what I mean? But dropping your extracts to -50, all of those fats, waxes, and lipids are frozen in the material. So the butane washes over, liquefies the entire trike, and leaves all of the bullshit behind.
And I think that's one of the big differences for people is that it's not heads. It's just literally liquefying it and collecting it.
Yeah. So, and then going back to that story where I was talking about blasting my friend's chips, I was like, what do you want made out of this? Because he came to me with it. You know what I mean? I didn't even have the idea.
So you can make batter out of it too?
Yeah, you can make batter out of it. But here's the thing.
You have to add terps back in.
The terps are not great. Even like you'll get a separation, you'll get a whole section of oil. It might smell nice, but compared to like it's not a good smoke. Right. So in my personal opinion, the best thing to do with those, and depending on what kind of product you're making, is crash out the diamonds, and then the terp fraction goes to distillate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think is the best to get the most out of your trash for BHO. People try and mix things back together or put it in a cart, or it's just not. You're
not worth it.
Yeah, it's not worth it. Your product's going to be subpar for sure if you do that. So I think the best bet to that is get all the THCA out of it that you can. And have the terp fraction go to distillate.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, dude, it's been amazing having you on.
Yeah, thank you.
Hopefully it's been a wealth of information for our listeners. I know I always learn something when we hang out. where can people find your IG, and where if people are
Insta's
looking?
the best way. If they have questions about the living soil grows or any of that stuff, you can DM me on there. I'm happy to answer any questions and help out. I like seeing I wouldn't say that a switch, but more people getting into the living soil side of things and growing and doing it for yourself and having fun with it and making the best extract and flower that you can.
And that's TDM_extracts. You know, we're all shadow banned. You got to type it in exactly. TDM_extracts.
And then if you're lucky enough and you know the right people, maybe you can find some of this stuff to try.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's always a nice segue because it's like, you know, that leaves people hungry.
Yeah.
You know, so, well, look, from the Jug Den, we appreciate having the Diamond Mine in studio. And as always, we love you guys. Peace.